Well, hello everybody and namaste, beautiful Bryce. How are you today, lovely friend Eola?
I'm so good. I'm a little tired this morning, but that's good. That just means we're living, right? But I'm so happy to be here. Before we hit play, I was like, let's get to talking about this skank. Let's continue talking about
Well, as you all know, it is marvelous, magical, mythical, um,
murderous.
murderous Monday today. That was the word I was looking for with our beautiful favorite nerd, Bryce. He does all this amazing research for us. I wish you were my history teacher. I would have definitely not dropped history along the way
I
because
think
you
I
would
would
have
have been
taught us the
fired.
real deal.
I think I would have been fired because I'd been like, now Catherine the Great was a skank who had some DJ chairs. Like I would have been fired. Parents would have been like, "Who is this person teaching my child this stuff?"
Exactly.
You know, like, what an
Exactly.
asshole. I would just been like, "This is nuts."
Exactly. Well, hello, Lisa. Hello, Silver Lining, Sandeep, Di. It's so good to have you girls in the chats with us. And yeah, wonderful. Hope you've had a great weekend, everybody. And I look forward to this week as well. Got a busy week ahead, which is always awesome. And of course, loving today's show again. Catherine the Great, Part 4. I mean, what an interesting babe this one is, right?
Oh my God. Like I said last week, and you guys, there's so much to this, as I said, this skank, there's so much to her that I mean, part of me is like, is she the Regina George? I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Mean Girls. It's fabulous with a Regina George, the bitchy woman of the group. I don't know. But as I said last week, taking the controllers, if she's part of this cult or not, we'll probably see more indication with that with her son when we talk about her son. Taking all that, putting it aside, I think with Catherine, there are a lot of things that as women can probably relate to her. And if you missed the first part where we talked about the beginnings of her life before she took over, like basically like Game of Thrones style, kicked her husband off the throne, go back and watch that because there's just too much to do one big show on her. Because we had to divide it up into different parts because there's so much to talk about with Catherine the Great. But just to kind of recap a little bit from last week, because we ended with the riveting tale of her like bopping her husband, who is also her second cousin, off the throne, whom she didn't like at all. Like she did not like this dude. This dude was a little dweeb. Like he was a narcissistic psychopath, a spoiled brat anyway. And that was quite shocking for that time. We also talked about, because there's just so much that's going on with the Romanov family. But again, with Catherine the Great, she herself is not a Romanov, even though she's considered in the line of the Romanovs. She married a Romanov. Her son was a Romanov. And as we started this series, for those that are new, we ended 2023 talking about Rasputin and the fall of Russia with the Bolshevik Revolution. And now we're kind of going back and re-looking at the Romanovs to end again with the Anastasia conspiracy. Was she saved from execution? That's kind of where we're ending. And again, Shanti, like our friend Rocker Mike had said with you, and I think this is not just Americans, I think in a lot of ways we want a bad guy and we want a good guy. And so I think what's happening with this Russian monarchy is that a lot of people in our corner of the internet believe that maybe the Romanovs were the good guys and the Bolsheviks were the bad guys. But I love how Rocker Mike said sometimes they're both bad guys. Like, and that's kind of my perspective too. And of course, if we're waiting for some, okay, Karen is still giggling about the coffee table. Me too. I love that coffee table. Can we do we have those pictures, Shanti, for our new friends?
We sure do, sugar. We sure do. You want the coffee table or the
coffee table again?
This one, that one with all the dicky doos on it, with all the dicky doos. That's just rude, man.
I mean, Shanti, what would you do if you were going through your grandma's attic
and I found this?
What would you do?
Sure, I mean, this is like so gross. It really is. I mean, look at those drippy dicks.
I mean, listen, penises are not that cute. As a straight woman, I'm telling you, they serve a purpose in the moment, but I don't know any straight woman that's liked receiving those pictures. You know, they're
no, not at all.
They're kind of like one-eyed little snake and monsters. So the fact that she's got a freaking table, I mean, look at that.
Look at this.
Can you imagine finding this in your grandma's attic?
And it's like a lollipop.
And I'm sorry that it always smells like Cheerios. I don't know what you guys do, but your bollies always smell like Cheerios. It doesn't matter what man it is. It's disgusting. Like, when I see that, like, I've wondered as a yoga teacher, as an Ashtanga teacher, there is a posture called Janushasana B, where you have to sit on your foot and put it in your perineum. And I've often wondered about men and that. And I've asked my boyfriend about that. He's like, whatever. But I'm like, how does this even work? Like, how do you walk around with something just dangling between your legs? Like, I don't understand. I'm so glad I'm a woman. But anyway, you guys, and we'll get to it, because the Nazis actually, when the Nazis invaded Russia, they found this furniture and they were like, what the hell? If the Nazis were horrified by this furniture, that's saying a lot, because the Nazis were doing their own sorts of hooboo-joobity, black magic. And if they were like, oh, Lisa D, does the top come off? Just curious if it had a dual purpose. Listen,
Lisa D, you put the question out that I was thinking. Actually, let's have a look at that. Let's try and decipher.
Get that into you. That's something that big into you, ladies.
Let's see if that's a removable table. No, it doesn't.
Listen, we've talked about this, Shanti. I don't know if it was on this channel or your other channel. There's that TikTok going around where a young woman takes a measuring tape and she's like, guys, this is 12 inches. And she holds it up and shows you like how big it is compared to her head. Like, where's this going to go? Like, men get so
exactly
about their size. I would rather actually you be on the smaller size. Just saying, because that hurts. If it's too big, it hurts. Where's it gonna go? So looking at that
exactly
table, if you could take that top off and use that table for other purposes, I'm impressed, because ouch, painful. Like, that seems so painful to me. But anyway, quality over quantity, Bryce. Yes, it's the motion of the ocean, right? It's not the size of the ship, it's the motion of the ocean that matters.
That's so true.
So sorry if you got your kids listening. This is not the history lesson for your
kids. I was gonna say, get those kiddies out the room. Although they probably know more about that than what we do nowadays.
I know, right? And actually, and that kind of goes with some of the urban legends around Catherine the Great, right? We have this whole. And I would say, even though her furniture is quite questionable, if we take the furniture out of it, I would actually say that the urban legends around Catherine and her sexual appetite, I think, are just that. And we're going to get into it because she only had about 10 to 15 boyfriends, we'll say, for the duration of her life, which honestly, I've had more. So, I think for her, because she was a woman and because she never married again after her husband was killed by one of her lover's brothers that we talked about last week, I can understand why Catherine never got remarried, right? She was power hungry. She didn't have a really good round the first time. We look the same thing with Queen Elizabeth I over in the United Kingdom, why she never got married, because it was to consolidate the power, because as a woman, it's at this time in history, it's always going to defer to the man. And a lot of the boyars that supported her, again, just to remind you guys, supported her in her takeover of the throne from her horrible, bratty husband. They thought, they were under the assumption that she would rule as regent for their son Paul. And once their son came to age, he would take over from his mother. Well, LOL. I mean, do you think a woman with that furniture is going to allow that to happen? No, she ruled as a monarchy in her own right. Even having, we talked about Ivan the Sixth, I believe he was the sixth, yeah, that he was killed in 1764, the infant emperor, all that happened. We talked about last week. We talked about how Catherine was crowned in Moscow on the 22nd of September, 1762, which was the creation of the imperial crown of Russia, which is considered one of the many treasures of the Romanov dynasty. You can now see it in one of the museums. I don't know if we want to show that, Catherine, because it's one of these famous crowns, kind of. I called you Catherine, Shanti. We're talking about Catherine. Catherine Edwards. I want to be very clear about that. We're not talking about our friend Catherine Edwards. We're talking about Catherine the Great. I would hate for this rumors to be like Catherine Edwards owns that furniture. Yeah, no, not furniture.
Okay, which one, Miss Sasha?
The crown, the imperial crown, because that's a very famous crown that is still famous to this day. And it's kind of like the English crown that we see at the Tower of London. You can see this crown at a museum in Moscow as well to this day. And so this was the crown that the last Tsar, which we're going to get to, Nicholas II, the one that was killed by the Volkovich with his family, that he was crowned in. And so this is a very, very famous crown. It symbolizes, from what I understand, the two different sides, or the East and the West, coming together under the one rule of the Russian Tsar. Okay, in the middle with the cross and the purple diamonds there. And so now when we think about Russia, that is Russia is a huge country. And so there is the western side of Russia, which would be like St. Petersburg, which was the capital then. And then we have the eastern side of Russia, Siberia, closer to Asia, which is where Rasputin was from. And so we are combining these two worlds and these two cultures under one reigning monarch. And I will say, so during Catherine's reign, I'm not going to, again, go into a lot of the military conquests that happened. I've said this with every single person we covered. I'm not a military channel. I'm not a military expert. I'm frankly quite bored by military history, but we are going to mention some things that are important and are relevant to the story of these people that we're talking about, right? We're talking about them as people. And Catherine's story with the military, though, was quite different, right? Because she wasn't actually a part, even though she's the czarina, or the czar for the lack of a better term, because she's a woman, she's not necessarily going to ever be going into battle or commanding troops on the battlefield because she is a woman. Now, with that being said, Catherine was very, very available in the war rooms. So we talked about this last week. Catherine the Great was many things, but stupid was not one of them. She was a very, very smart woman. And so she was able to strategically talk about military conquest without actually being on the field. And she slept with and romanticized with a lot of high-ranking military officials, right? And so she was able to use them and grant them favors in order to get them to do what she wanted. Now, something interestingly enough, when she reigned, she expanded Russia by 200,000 square miles. There was a huge fight, territory battle that we are still seeing played out to this day during her reign. And this was over the Crimea and the Ukraine. So we see a lot of that with Catherine, the struggle over this area, which if you guys haven't seen that episode with Shanti and Rocker Mike about the Ukraine, you should absolutely go back and watch that after this, because what's happening now was happening then. And we see the personality with the people of the Ukraine. I like how Mike said, some Ukrainians do consider themselves Russian, some don't. But again, it's that merging of the East and the West, right? We're in this weird area where you could go either way, East or West. So I thought that was very, 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 very fascinating. Now let's talk about something before we get to the serfdom, because I know I said last week I was kind of teasing that with her of owning serfs or slaves, but we're going to get back to that, because that was part of her bargaining chip. And she kind of shot herself in the foot with this, because when she would get people to do favors for her, these military men, because she was a woman, she would offer them serfs in return. So slaves in return. So we're going to talk about that in a moment, because that was a big issue in her reign. But before that, let's talk about some other things that happened that I thought were interesting, that kind of like a red flag when I was looking through her. So she did, because of the expansion of Russia, she was able to create a stronger agricultural farming enterprise for Russians. And we're seeing kind of the opposite of that today, right? Because we're seeing all these farmers across the world starting to push back against mandates. But she was kind of helping people establish lands where they could have agriculture. Now, this is also going to play into serfdom, which we'll get into. So it's with that being said, it's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It's a good thing for the overall economy of Russia, which is, I think, what a lot of historians talk about, but they neglect to say that this was farmed by slaves, basically, right? So anyway, this is interesting to me. She opened banks and started the printing of paper money in Russia.
Wow. Just like that.
Super interesting, isn't it? Now,
I mean, when was this? What year are we talking now?
This was in like 1769-ish.
But it's also interesting because that's the same time that the Rothschilds were actually dispersing themselves throughout the world.
Yeah.
So what was that, like the central bank of Russia, or what was she opening?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not, economics is not a forte of mine either. Trust me, like whenever someone tries to math with me, I get the wah, 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 wah in my head. But I just thought that was very interesting. It goes to 1769. So if we look at that, for the Americans in the audience listening right now in America, if you guys put it into perspective with the banks, we are leading up to the American Revolution. We're on the heels of the American Revolution, which started in 1776. All right. Leading up after the American Revolution, where the monarchy lost control of the United States, what happened with Abraham Lincoln in 1860? So the Civil War wasn't just about slavery. It was also about the Rothschilds wanting to implement their monetary system in the United States, which would mean the monarchy would own us again. And Abraham Lincoln said no. And so he created the greenback money for Americans, right? And then after the war, what happened? He was assassinated. And then Ulysses S. Grant was put in, who created the Act of 1871 or 72, where we all of a sudden were put on the Rothschild system again and given Social Security, that's when all the licensing started, where we lost our independence, right? So with that being said, the fact that Catherine was not assassinated tells me that this was probably a more nefarious banking system, because we do have, again, leaders emerging in the world like Abraham Lincoln, who wanted to create a monetary system just for their particular country without the influence of the Rothschilds. Okay, so this is interesting, but he was assassinated for that. They took him right out, bullet to the head. Yeah. And the next president ushered in the Rothschilds. So the fact that she wasn't assassinated for this, in my mind, makes me think she was making deals.
Were there ever any attempts on her life, though?
Well, yeah, there were lots of attempts on her life, of course. But I think I don't think it had anything to do with the monetary system. I think it had to do with her being a woman. It had to do with the politics behind the Romanovs and her son. So I don't know. In my notes, I just wrote interesting. Yeah. Like, that's just interesting, knowing what we know now. And I could be wrong. It could have been her setting up a monetary system just for Russia. I don't know. But the fact that it was successful and that wasn't the reason for any attempted assassinations tells me she brokered a deal. And now remember, the Rothschilds are what? They're German, right? What's Catherine? German.
Russian. Is she German? That's right.
She was German. Yeah, now she gave her a lead.
Listen, weren't the Rothschilds actually, they were Khazarian, man.
Yeah, and the
Rothschilds are actually Khazarian, yeah.
Did they come up through, which is that Ukrainian area, right? That Kazakhstan, So we're seeing this, you know, and if you remember, the family that both Peter, her husband, and Catherine were a part of, that was the real powerful family, was, let me find this here, so make sure I get the name right. It's the where's her mom? Okay, so it was the Holstein Goddard family. Holstein, so that's Holstein, Goddard, or Goddard, Gottorp, Holstein Goddard. And I always like to say the Holstein Goddard group because that's what it just sounds that way to me. Now, and that they're a very, very strong Germanic family, very powerful Germanic family. Now, interestingly enough, they still have family members left today. I did a little snooping. They still got people, high elite people in this particular family today in the Germanic area. So that's just interesting. With that being said, I'm going to kind of just leave that alone for a little bit. That's so with the money instituting in Russia, I would not be shocked if it had to do with the power grab that the Rothschilds were going after and their connections, and they're coming up and swimming up into Europe and the connections through the families of, and money speaks, right? Like that's how the Rothschilds were able to get their power globally, was through controlling money, right? And so money speaks. Now, she did completely change the educational system of Russia, especially for girls. Now, we might say rah rah siskumba, she gave women the power to be educated, but we're talking about elite women. So we're talking about the women of the aristocratic world receiving a higher level of education. So you know, it's now when I looked at how she created her education, Kate was, well, yeah. So, okay, I don't know, Kate Middleton is German, but Catherine the Great was, I'm talking about Catherine the Great, not Kate Middleton. Catherine the Great was German, right? So was Peter. So was her husband, who he was Russian through his grandfather, but no, I'm talking about Catherine the Great from like the 1700s. So anyway, so the educational system, when I looked at how she established, now I covered a long time ago, right when I first opened my channel, I covered the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve was created off of an island here in Georgia called Jekyll Island. I've been there. It grosses me out. It makes me feel weird. Anyway, now the Federal Reserve, a lot of people think, and I know our viewers are aware now, but a lot of people believe the Federal Reserve is a banking system only, and B, just for the United States. No, it's not. It's part of this Rothschild, JP Morgan controlling mechanism. It is not just the United States. It's also the educational system. So once the Federal Reserve was signed in the United States, they took over our educational system, which dumbed us down, right? It made us, we're seeing the fruits of the labor. Before the Federal Reserve was enacted in the United States, kids were learning Greek, Coptic Egyptian in America. They were speaking multiple languages. And now kids can't even speak English in America, right? So now they don't even know what a woman is. So we're seeing the fruits of that labor. Now, her educational system, that was commissioned, sounds to me a lot like the Federal Reserve education and public schools that would come later in the 20th century. There was something very, very suspicious to me about this educational system. Now, again, that could be brushed under the mat because, yay, women get to go to school now, right? So I think what happens in history, and what our history professors do, is they focus on, and to me, that's propaganda. That now women can get educated. Well, let's hold back a second. It's not women. It's elite women. And women, and we're talking about education, the elite women were already learning how to read and write, had basic education. They're just getting a more advanced education at this point. So it's only a specific group. It's not the common man. And it looks very, very much like propaganda. It looks very, very much like a form of mind control. In fact, she removed.
What makes you say that? Why do you say that would be a form of mind control? I'm just interested.
She removed playtime. There were no with schools, and we're seeing that in the United States. They're removing playtime, so kids were not allowed to play. They had no what we call recess now. They had no creative outlet. The students were put in extremely cold classrooms, so they would stay awake and could focus. Now, I do believe in cold therapy.
So these are just girls. Are we just talking girls or girls and boys? Because are we not?
Girls and
Okay,
boys.
so they're educating the elite girls. So I would imagine it's the daughters of the elites as well, right?
Yeah,
So it
the
would be the
lawyers.
kids of the elites that are being, yeah, I like what you say, Karen, trained, not educated. So you have to be able to hold your own. And I think she probably saw the benefit of being a woman in power. And if you're a powerful woman and if you had the bloodlines and what have you, how important it was to hold your own in a man's world. So that's probably why she would have done that with the elites only, you know, future leaders of Russia, maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we look at the controllers today, how many women are involved and how smart they are. And I will tell you, you know, no offense to the guys out there, I love men, but the highest recorded IQ is that of a woman. Women have the ability to multitask. Women provide an asset as far as, especially if they're programmed and trained. And the fact that she removed playtime, like that breaks my heart. Like, I will say, I'm going to give my sister a huge shout out because my sister, she is a fabulous mother and she makes her kids go outside for at least an hour every day and play. She encourages playtime. She encourages them to color and to use their imagination more so than schoolwork. And I applaud her for that because my nephew and nieces are growing up to have their own personalities. They're growing up to be very grounded in themselves. You know, they're funny. And I think she encouraged that with this, playtime gives kids independent expression, right? If you have a room full of toys and you release 5 kids into that room, those kids are all going to go to gravitate towards different toys and create different imaginary worlds. And so when you take that away from a child, you're taking away the essence of life from a child, you know? And so that really bothered me that she stripped playtime from all kids.
Absolutely.
And
it's like, it's true what Karen's saying again, deportment. So you had a deportment class and etiquette and all these finishing schools now in places like Switzerland and wherever else. You're learning all these upper echelon things. But my parents taught us these things, man.
I mean, I grew up in the South on Sundays when I was in 6th and 7th grade, so like 12 and 13 years old. After church, we would have to go to junior cotillion for the kids, and it was like 2 hours on Sunday where we were taught how to eat with all the silverware, how we were taught how to waltz, we were taught how to foxtrot, we were taught how to be escorted, we were taught elite, like, etiquette for the elite societies. And so you can do, that's important to you, you can find like a couple hours a week just to do that stuff. You don't have to like train it consistently. And yeah, Shanti, my mom, like growing up, if we had bad table manners or if we misspoke, we would get thumped on the head. Like if I put my elbows on the table at dinner, my mom would just reach over and thump us on the head, right? Heaven forbid I end my sentence in a preposition, y'all. If I ended my sentence in a preposition when I was really little, if I said, "Where is it at?" my mother would say, "Between the A and T on Preposition Street." But when I got older, if I ended in a preposition, she would smack me upside the head. You know, so parents should take charge of teaching children how to present themselves. I mean, I know we have fun on this channel, but like if you got to give a speech to a big corporate room, you got to know how to speak properly, right? So yeah, and I do know like etiquette schools are big here. A quick flick in the ear, El Girl is like right in the back of the head.
Absolutely.
So anyway, okay. So now this is interesting too, and I cannot wait to hear your thoughts on this, Shanti, and our friends watching right now, because we know a lot about orphanages now. So she set up in 1764, so before the banking system was set up, she set up orphanages in Russia. Now, 2 years this was 2 years into her reign, over 40,000 children were admitted.
Okay, that is obscene. Because again, you know, we talk about the orphanage. How many, and I mean, I've had the same conversations with Kerry Saint, who's the advocate for the adoptees. I mean, how many single mothers and loose women
were there
to create 40,000 orphans. You see, here again, now we're talking Cabbage Patch Kids. That's what I'm saying. Now, I don't believe they all came from the serfs. Maybe a few, you know.
We're going to talk about the serfs in a minute, because the serfs did keep their children. We're going to talk, because it was behoove of the serfs for the elites. We'll get to that in a minute. That's a big one. That's what I'm going to go through these little things first. Well, one thing, and I'm going to put my glasses on, guys, because I'm having a hard time reading my own writing here. Now, one thing that's interesting is that there was an infant mortality rate in the orphanages that was higher than the average. Now, we know
why. From what were they dying?
Exactly.
Do we know?
Exactly. We know that infant mortality rate was higher than it is now. Obviously, that was common for, you know, at one point in history, kids didn't even get named until they're like 5 years old because they didn't know if they were going to survive. So the fact that the average is higher here, they could blame it on sickness. They could blame it on all sorts of things. And I think most of the time throughout our history, we would just take it and accept it and be like, well, it just is what it is. Tough. Life was tough back then. But it makes me wonder. What were some of these kids dying from? Like, for real, what were some of these kids dying from? Were they dying from natural causes?
No.
Or were their lives being taken from them?
Yeah, I think I was going to say that sounds like more like that, because if we're looking at, if we're just looking at sacrifice and stuff, it goes back to the beginning of the ages, right? You're just looking at statues and stuff of these disgusting things, eating children and what have you.
The worship of Yahweh or Moloch, which is Yahweh is Moloch, which is Well, so I thought that was super, super interesting. Okay, so she was a great lover of the arts. We know that by her furniture. She didn't need to tell us twice that she was a lover of the arts. She was Voltaire's pen pal for 15 years. Now, interesting, he called her the Star of the North. And he also referred to her as different nicknames that are indicated in the book of Revelation as being the Antichrist, which I thought was interesting. Like the Venus star, like he had nicknames for her, which I thought was interesting. It could be nothing, we could say, oh, you're a little devil and not really mean it in that way. So I don't know. Now, Voltaire, they never met, but they were pen pals for 15 years. Now, something I felt that was interesting as well is Catherine nationalized the churches in Russia. So the money could help her pay for things like war. So she nationalized the churches. Now,
she nationalized churches. She started orphanages. She started educating women, the elite girls, the elite women. No, there's something not right here.
Something's strange, right? Now, with the nationalization of churches, we have nationalized churches in the United States. They're 501c3s. That's part of the government. The church is part of the government. You can say it's a nonprofit. No, it's part of the government. It's 501c3. It's nationalized. Right? And also, I know you probably talked a lot about the Jesuits on your channel, Shanti, so I'm sure you're very familiar with the Jesuits were never created for anything good. But in 1773, while a lot of Europeans were waking up to the fact that the Jesuits were murdering people and hurting people, Catherine made Russia an asylum for Jesuits. So my question is if Russia is the Russian Orthodox Church, and we know even to this day they have a different Christmas Day, they have a different Easter, they're very separate from the other churches, especially the Catholic Church. We talked about this with Rasputin. So the Jesuits aren't a part of the Russian Orthodox Church. In fact, you would think common sense that they're at odds because they pulled out of the Catholic. So why, if all of these people in Russia are being terrorized by the Jesuits, and so these other Europeans are trying to abolish the Jesuits, why are they taking asylum in Russia instead of just going back to Italy or to the Vatican? Like, the math ain't mathin'. It's not adding up. Do they think we're idiots?
It's crazy. It just seems to me like she was a law unto herself. She knew a lot of people. She obviously spoke to a lot of people. And I think that she probably thought she had allies in people, and they thought that they had allies in her with all sorts of all her male counterparts.
Yeah, that she was manipulating and using. So, as we talked about last week with the beginning of Catherine's life, I had a lot of empathy for her. I could see her struggling to survive. I posed the question of, like, what would you do? Would you roll the dice if your husband was as awful as hers? And then we see that switch with the birth of her son, Paul. And so, I don't know. These are just red flags to me. And the fact that Catherine the Great is venerated, just like Peter the Great, just like Alexander the Great, as being this really powerful monarch that for good, like, brought Russia to the place it was for good. But for whose good? Because I don't think the peasants were benefiting from her. I think the elites were benefiting from her. I think she was playing chess with the lives of the Russian people by bringing in the Jesuits. How easy to control people if you got the freaking, her husband, before he was killed, got rid of the secret police that we've talked about. He got rid of them. That Ivan the Terrible had said. He got rid of that. But then she brings in the Jesuits? Did she bring back?
That's crazy.
Is this the birth of the KBT? Like,
yeah, doesn't seem right at all.
It
does not seem right.
It's weird. So let's talk about the serfs, because this is really important, you guys. And I think it's super important conversation just in general. And I know people here on our channel are very well aware that there's a lot of propaganda around race at this point, and especially this idea that white people have never been enslaved. And that is complete bullshit. If anybody's ever studied history in their lives, every single race under the sun has been enslaved at some point. And so serfs are a great, great indication of white people being slaves. So at this point, Russia was one of the last countries to use serfdom. Okay, so serfdom connects, and I think I sent you like it shows the pyramid. I sent you like a graph of what, and I can talk you guys through this of what the serf situation was like. All right, so serfs were beneath peasants, you guys. They were beneath peasants. A lot of Europe had serfdom at some point in like the Middle Ages, but they had started to kind of, we're coming into this age of enlightenment with the Voltaire. Interestingly enough, she's having this relationship with Voltaire, who was considered to be enlightened. So this age of reason, where we're starting to realize that human beings are actually human beings and they're not property. But Catherine had made the mistake again of promising people serfs. That, she herself owned 500,000 serfs. The state of Russia owned 2.8 billion alone. And so she would get these men to support her and do things for her. And she would in return give them serfs. So give them slaves. All right. So this was a style of cheap labor. This cheap labor or free labor is what made aristocrats rich. This was a social caste system in Russia, kind of like a pyramid scheme. Now, only aristocrats. So if you and I, Shanti, are living in Russia at this time and we're peasants, and we end up making money, a good substantial amount of money, and we think, okay, I'm going to go buy some land and then I'm going to buy some serfs to help me work the land to make more money. You and I, Shanti, would not be allowed to buy serfs because we're not aristocrats. So the only people in Russia who are allowed to own serfs are the boyars, the aristocrats, and the state. So this is more of a division between them and us, the ruling elite and the peasantry, because the peasantry are normal average people, the common folk that aren't serfs. The serfs are below the peasants. All right, so now Catherine could not revoke serfdom because she had promised slaves, she had trafficked humans to the people who supported her. But she did make it that the serfs could lodge complaints against their landlords, but she refused to liberate them. So if the master of the serf was beating the serf too much, the serf could lodge a complaint about that, but 9 times out of 10, nothing was done. So this is just lip service, right? This is lip service. This is all this is. So we have this growing, I said this last week. What was happening astrologically at this time? is also what's happening astrologically now at this time. So we're seeing a lot of the same personality traits. We're seeing a lot of the same revolts and great awakening happening then that we're seeing now. Only then they fucked up, right? Our ancestors didn't do it fully. Hopefully we can do it better the second time. So a lot of peasants and a lot of serfs were starting to push back against serfdom. They did not want to be owned. Now, serfs were bound to the land they work. So the land-owning nobles, they were bound to the land. Now, here's when we talk about the children. So most of the orphans were not serfs' children because the children born on the land were also bound to the same land. So
where did the serfs actually originally come from? Were they Russians or were they imported from somewhere?
Well, serfdom
and
was
what
all over
made them a
Europe.
serf?
At one
What
point,
made them a serf?
It's just a slave class. At one point, serfs were all over Europe. So the feudal system. Remember the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, there was a feudal system. So the lowest of the low. So peasants, you know, we laugh when we say peasants were the poor people. Peasants were just the common folk. So peasants were the people who had to work for a living, but they were technically free, right? They still lived under the laws of the nobility, but they weren't owned by the nobility. The serfs, however, were the lowest of the low. So some people could, it did happen on occasion that someone would sell themselves into serfdom. So let's say that I'm a man, I'm a strong man, and my family is struggling. And I sacrifice my life and I sell myself into serfdom. And so my family gets money for selling me into serfdom to save them. Does that make sense? So it's all Russian people. It's all white people. They're not brought in from they're all Russian or European, we'll say, because this was happening all over Europe until at this point, Russia's the only country still doing it. Right? Does that make sense? So,
yeah.
And I think I put some pictures up of the serfs. I mean, a life of a serf belonged to the state. So if you were a serf, your life did not belong to you. It belonged to the state, which makes me think of our birth certificates today. You belong to the state, right? And nobles could actually trade serfs. So we saw this.
I'm just trying. What's Pugachev's capture?
Talk about Pugachev's rebellion. We're going to talk about that in a minute because this is going to lead up to a big rebellion of the serfs. So just like in America, the slave owners could buy and trade slaves, so could the nobles in Russia. So if you've got a family of serfs that are working your land, a husband, a wife, and a child, they could easily come in and just take the child and sell it to another landowner. Or sell the wife. They could break
animals. Like, you know, if your cow gives birth to a calf, the minute it's old enough, it gets sold to the wherever. Oh my God, that's just
beautiful. So this is the exact same thing as what was happening to the slaves in America. There's no difference here. But it was happening to white people, and the slaves in America were black people. No difference. They were beaten all the time. If they didn't work the land properly, the slaves, the owners had a right to beat them. Right? Even Peter, Catherine's husband, before he died, before she took over, made it so it was illegal for a noble to kill a serf without going to court first. Like he had to go to court first to prove why he wanted to kill a serf, and if the court agreed, he could kill him. Right? It's horrific. Horrific. Think about every story you hear in the United States of slavery. Same thing was happening over in Russia. Horrific. And Catherine did nothing to end it because she herself owned 500. Y'all, she owned 500,000 slaves, basically. 500,000 serfs she personally owned. The state of Russia owned 2.8 billion serfs. This is bad. This is real bad. We're not talking about a small, little, tiny trafficking operation. We're talking about a huge operation, right? Of trafficking humans and using humans. So Pugachev's rebellion. This was a rebellion that happened from 1773 to 1775. It's also known as the Peasants' War. So Pugachev was a disaffected ex-lieutenant of the Russian army. He assumed leadership of an alternative government. So Pugachev set out to create an alternative government to Catherine's government. And he claimed that he was Peter III. So we have another conspiracy theory. that Peter III was not killed in the jail by Orlov, as we talked about last week, her husband.
Right, but probably sent into hiding or went into hiding or something.
That was the story, and that Pugachev was Peter III, and Peter III was going to take his country back. And I laugh about Peter III being an annoying brat because that's the story we're told. But part of me, in doing this research, does make me wonder: was Peter III an annoying brat? Was he as bad as they said he was, or is that propaganda? I don't know. It happened over 200 years ago. I don't know, but it is a question I have in my mind. So Pugachev claims, he's going around claiming to be Peter III, and that he's going to end serfdom. He's going to set up an alternative government where everybody's going to be free, and he's going to challenge the czarship of Catherine the Great. Take down the oligarchy, take down the aristocrats, take down the boyars. And he created the largest peasant revolt in Russian history. This was a true insurrection. This was a big, huge, true insurrection. He caused so much stress because he was building up momentum, right? And this is a good example. As far as the elites, there's not as many of them as there are of us. And this was the problem, because if all the serfs just dropped their tools and said, we're done, who's going to stop them?
Yeah.
There's like 5 elites and like 100 serfs. So this is what's happening. So Pugachev did get kind of violent, though. He did go around to these different villages and like kill the governors, kill the ruling elite. So he did kind of do some messed up, maybe that wasn't that great. Anyway.
So he was actually our kind of guy.
Yeah, he was a vigilante. We'll just put it that way. Now, Pugachev was arrested, and he was that's not him.
Oops,
that's the
sorry.
He was put.
Should I put it back up?
He was put in a cage. So Pugachev was put in a cage and arrested and like dragged all over, and he was executed on the 10th of January, 1775. He was beheaded, drawn, and quartered, made an example of, to squell the serfs from revolting. So what y'all think about that?
That is just so nasty.
I mean,
talk about fear-mongering. But, for me, it just shows as well how far back this enslavement of the human consciousness goes as well. Because really, even to this day and age, when we think about it, like there are so many of us compared to that 1%, right? Although they have armies and this and that and the next thing, but really at the end of the day, the armies will be outnumbered by the amounts of civilians there are. And going back then, as you say, to 5 elites, there was 100 slaves kind of thing, or serfs. And none of them thought to just down tools and say, screw you, what are you going to do without us?
Well, that's what Pugachev was getting them to do. That's what was happening.
Yeah.
He was giving them the sovereignty to just say, screw you, we're done. Farm your own land. And that had to be squelched in a mighty way. He had to be made an example of.
Yeah.
So anyway, now Catherine struggled with her relationship with her Paul's son. As we talked about last week, Paul was taken from her at birth. I do highly recommend go back and watch last week's episode if you missed it. Now, Paul did get married, and this just really upsets me what she did to him. The first wife. Now, Paul, I believe Paul was Peter's son. There was speculation, as we talked about last week, that Paul was the son of her lover, Sergei. But Paul looked identical to his father. Like, there was no denying who his father was. And Paul also had some, like, I don't know if it was bipolar. There was something going on. There was something going on emotionally with his father. And Paul kind of showed the same. Very temperamental, very emotionally unstable. There was just no denying that Peter was Paul's father. Now, Paul was first married as like an 18-year-old kid to this woman. He loved this woman. He fell madly in love with his wife, and his wife got pregnant and had a stillborn, a son, and it killed her in the process as well. And Paul went into deep, deep mourning over the death of his first wife. And Catherine, whether this is true or not, Catherine, in order to snap Paul out of his mourning for his dead wife and his dead son, Catherine proceeded to show Paul a box that his wife had with all these love letters she had written between herself and Paul's best friend. So basically, Catherine was like, you need to get over it. She was cheating on you. The baby probably wasn't yours anyway. Now, whether that was true or not, in my opinion, is beside the point. Why would you do that to your son? Even if it was true, even if she was having an affair and the baby was his best friend's, she's now dead. The baby's now dead. Why are you going to rub salt on the wound for your own son and tell your own son that she was boinking his best friend anyway? Sometimes it's best to let sleeping dogs lie. And it's mean. That was just mean. So Paul hated his mom. Paul hated Catherine. Hated her. Now, Paul did get remarried. And Paul ended up having a son named Alexander, who's going to be in the line of czars. And what pisses me off about Catherine too is Catherine struggled so much with Empress Elizabeth taking Paul from her. You would think as an empathetic person, she would not repeat that same thing to her son and her daughter-in-law, but she did. When Alexander was born, she took Alexander from Paul and raised Alexander. She raised Alexander, her grandson, with pomp and circumstance. And in fact, she was planning on leaving the throne to Alexander, skipping Paul. She was planning a huge ceremony to announce that Alexander would be taking the throne from Paul, which obviously pissed Paul off. And but before that could be done, on the 6th of November, 1796, the morning started as normal, but by 9 a.m. she was found face down on the floor. Catherine, excuse me. Doctors were rushed in. She had had a stroke, and she was given her last rites at 9:45 p.m. the following day. She passed away at 67 years old before she could change her will to make Alexander her heir, her grandson. So Paul was then anointed as the Tsar. Now, she is buried at the Cathedral of the St. Peter and St. Paul Fortress in St. Petersburg. Now, at the time of her death, this is where we're going to chuckle a little bit. Paul hated his mother so much. He hated his mother so much. Have you guys heard the urban legend that Catherine the Great died having sex with a horse? Have y'all heard that urban legend?
I have, yeah.
Do you know who started that rumor?
Probably him.
Her son. He started the urban legend that his mother was such a nasty skank. I don't think they used the term skank back then, but he hated her so much that he proclaimed that a horse had been strapped up above her for her to have sex with, and the strap broke and fell on her. Now, we know that's not true by her body, and her whole body. She had a stroke. But I will say to the mothers in the audience, if your child's never created a rumor like that, you must be doing a pretty good job. That is how much he hated his mother. He created that legend.
Karen says maybe he saw the furniture.
He might have. And we're going to talk about Paul next. And I said this last week, what I had planned to do when I initially started to do this is I was going to talk about the Anastasia conspiracy, but I was going to go back and only hit the big ones, right? I was going to hit the original Romanov, Peter the Great, Catherine the Great, and then go all the way to Nicholas II. But you guys, Paul, we're going to have to talk about Paul too. This kid lived the most bizarre life out of any royal member I have ever studied in my life. I'm fascinated by Paul. I'm fascinated by him. And not a good way or a bad way. I'm just intrigued by him. He was obsessed with the Knights.
How old was he when his mother passed on?
Oh, probably, I would guess, I'll get to that next week, but I would probably guess maybe in his 30s. coming up on 40.
Oh, right. So it was like a fully grown adult already.
Yeah, because she had him at like 25, 26 when she had him, and she died at 67. So he was full on into adult. Like he had full on kids of his own, which all the kids now coming in the Romanov line, ending at Nicholas the second, are coming from Paul, right? So we're gonna see one of his kids, then his brother, and then that's gonna line off till Nicholas the second. I had it written down. When we get to Nicholas II, we'll talk about how far back Catherine and what I think it was like his 3 times great grandmother or something. But we're definitely going to talk about Paul, you guys, because part of me has a lot of empathy for Paul. I would be very curious to see from people who are SRA survivors if some of Paul's quirks were not due to the fact that he was abused as a kid. I don't know. But he wasn't necessarily the best ruler. He was a little crazy. There was definitely some mental issues going on with Paul. We're going to talk about this, guys, because it's juicy. It's totally super juicy. Definitely would want him leading me. But where do those mental issues come from? That's my question. Where did his personality?
Yeah, exactly. There was something. If you look at this memoir that he had, I mean, I'm like wondering where's he when all of this stuff is going on, and she's making all these crazy laws and.
Yes. Now he wanted we talked about this last week. There are a few like miniseries that are based off of Catherine the Great. One is called The Great, and it's with Dakota Fanning's sister. She plays a young Catherine, and one of the English actor, the kid, you would recognize him. But he plays Peter the Third, like a comic, really like comedy. It's played as comedy, right? It's loosely based on Catherine the Great's life. But there's also another miniseries, I think it's called Catherine the Great, with Helen Mirren. She plays Catherine the Great. And I watched this miniseries. And the actor, and it's Catherine the Great later in life. So it's her full on, it's after she took the throne. There is an actor that plays Paul. And I will say, out of every actor in that miniseries, the guy who played Paul, to me, did the best job playing that character, because he played the character exactly the way that I envisioned him to be, with his weird quirks and his obsessive compulsive disorder. And you see the disdain that he has for his mother, but you also see that he needed his mother because she was the czar for all intents and purposes, and also his mother, and she held the keys to his future. You could see the way that Helen Mirren and this actor played off of each other. She was not very motherly to him, but you did see her very much coddle Alexander, Paul's son, the grandson. So I can't wait to actually talk to you guys about Paul, because I think we're going to learn more about Catherine from her son.
Nice.
Yeah. And her furniture. Yeah. So Charmaine said, man, this is so interesting, isn't it? Like, it's so freaking interesting. And I don't know, obviously we're looking back over 200 years. So I don't know if we'll ever get the full truth. But I think right now, and this is why it's so important, I believe, because we learn history so we don't repeat it. So we don't repeat history.
Yeah, we are repeating it though. That's the sad thing.
I know.
But I think we sort of more at a point now where we can actually stop the repetition of this again, and probably ever before. And this is why at some point we're going to be doing a deep dive on Spartacus. I've got to tell you, right?
Yeah. After we finish the Romanovs, let's do it, because.
We do Spartacus because I think I love that whole, the gladiators were obviously the slaves and kids of the slaves that were taken from the slaves and trained by the elite to do whatever they wanted as well. And I just love the fact, I'm a great, Bryce, you're probably the same. Great fan of the underdog.
Yeah. We're the underdog, right? And I wanted to point something out to you, Shanti, as well. Like, when we're looking at the game of the aristocrats, like, Shanti, you and I are both O negative. We both have connections in our ancestral line to the royal family. I know I'm related directly to, look at us, we're commoners now. So over time, this is what cracks me up, because over time, as time goes on, aristocratic bloodlines are going to start to be placed in the commoners, because you get further and further and further separated from the nucleus of the royal bloodline, right? And I want to say that in quotes because I want everybody to, I think I can speak for you, Shanti, in saying this. I don't believe that any human being is superior to the next just because of birth.
No, definitely.
So,
I mean, there's some fools out there.
I mean, it's I judge your value by your character and your intelligence, not by your blood type or your race. Like that's, and I've seen that. It's scary. I've seen this in the quote unquote truther world where people are like, we should kill all the people with this particular. I'm like, then you're going to kill everyone, you vigilante, because I would reckon that most of our viewers right now, if you looked further back in your history, your family history, you're going to find aristocrats. You're going to find connection to royalty. And now we've pedaled back so much. I mean, granted, thank you, God, for putting me as a commoner. I've said it before. I'd rather be a peasant then, and I'd rather be a peasant now. Right? Like it's not a great life in my opinion. Karen, you said a lot happened in that era that seems to be repeating. Yeah, because the astrological, it's repeating the same where Pluto's position it's repeating the same astrological map basically. And hopefully you guys,
but, in my opinion, is the whole purpose of astrology is to transcend the chart. And in this case, it's the global chart, right? And anyone who thinks astrology doesn't exist, please think again, because it goes back, and you can ask anyone how far back astrology, and it's one of the tools that God had that the fallen angels brought down. Yes, it's been corrupted in many ways, but that's only because God had it originally. So astrology is a very powerful tool to observe, especially how the heavens are and how the planets are aligned and how it affects the heavens, the heavenlies, and of course, us paupers and us commoners here on Earth. But absolutely, but the whole objective of astrology is to overcome your chart. It's to transcend that. And if we are having things repeat themselves again, and you're so right about that, Karen, because I was thinking exactly the same thing. If we are repeating, as things are repeating themselves again, just with different people in different meat suits, but probably the same entities doing these things over and over, and we just like the idiots go, okay, we'll take it. It's up to us to say, screw you, buddy. We ain't doing this no more. We've learned now. We're not going to allow ourselves to be your slaves and your paupers and whatever anymore, I'm just going to say,
I take pride in the fact that I have never had to manipulate a man for sex. I've never had to have crazy erotic furniture for sex. Listen, ladies.
I need to use it either.
I've never, and I've always had a man. I've always had a sexy man. So I've never had to manipulate or have erotic furniture. I'm laughing so hard that Karen Bishop's comment. I want to know more about this, Karen. My great grandmother was a thief that married a police commissioner.
She knew how to keep herself protected. You go, Grandma.
That is your great grandmother's. I'm assuming this is back in the wilden days of the 1800s. That is a story.
Just shows you how the goody two shoes, that police commissioner, all prim and proper, no doubt, and upholding the law as best he can, has got this really, I want to say, skanky grandma. And I don't mean, you know what I mean, like grandma doing her thing and manipulating the world, and obviously absolutely seducing him, and he just cannot stop this, right?
I mean, Karen, well, I want to know, this is hysterical. What country was this in? I want to know about your great grandmother. What was she doing?
Silver linings, I completely agree with you. We're repeating history because we were never taught the real history, but it's up to us to educate ourselves now. There are so many tools out there, and I agree, we have been duped. They have done, and I'm never going to get away from that. And we have been duped. We have been dumbed down. When you speak to people that have come out of the arcane, they will tell you how much these creatures of the night hate us, and they'll tell you why, because of us human beings actually having We are so intelligent. Our consciousness is magical for them, right? It's what they want. They don't have it, which is why they use us and they'll farm us for that sort of stuff. They'll never admit that they can't actually exist without the humans, actually. So it's up to us to actually teach ourselves, educate ourselves, especially in this day and age. You know, as much as what technology is what they've also used to screw us over with, technology is also here for us to learn to use. There are so many resources now on the internet. Everywhere we go, we have resources. It's up to us to actually get off our backsides now and stop blaming everyone else and stop judging each other for being the wrong religion and stuff like that. It's really about saying, hey, we're human beings. Let's stand up together. Let's all do this. And let's all just figure it out and not fall into this trap again. Let's get smart. Let's play them at their own game. We've watched them do it now for centuries. So now let's use some of their own tricks against them. Yeah.
You know what, Karen?
And I like that. The more I learn about exactly my ancestry, the stronger I become within myself. It's so true.
In the Indian culture, they say if you don't honor your ancestors, you carry them on your back. And I've been really started trying to honor my ancestors as well, for the good and the bad. You know, you made me who I am today. And I will say, Karen also brought up that Australia was discovered in 1776. And I will say, Karen, I've actually thought about doing a deep dive into Australia and its discovery, because what's interesting is if you look at the United States, Georgia, where I live, the colony before independence was a penal colony. It's where England sent its prisoners. And then once we won our freedom, England didn't have anywhere to send its prisoners anymore. So it's interesting that Australia was discovered the same year that the American Revolution started. And it's almost like that's why I think Australians and Americans have so much in common, because it was by, you know, you just got sent, your ancestors got sent on a different boat after a few years later than the ones that ended up here in Georgia as penal people. So, yeah.
What murders are you talking about, Karen? I'd love to discuss the murders here with you. Exactly what murders. That would be great. I would love, in fact, Bryce, if we did a deep dive into Australia on this channel.
Absolutely. After we finish the Romanovs, we just I'll put it on my list, because I've always felt a tender connection with the Australians, because
I love the Aussies.
Yeah.
And especially all the stuff that's been happening there. You know, when you're looking at all the orphan trains and stuff that went there. And you know, it's like, because also Australia being so far out, and all the horrific stuff, I'd love to know what they thought they could get away with there. And having said that as well, we've got to look at these countries, and the same as Africa, when you're looking at the First Nations people, like the original people in Australia. Amazing when we start doing that. So, yeah.
And I will say, I've spent a long time in Australia. Australia is one of my favorite. I've loved Australia. I love the people. I spent a long time in Australia in my 20s, and it just I was so fascinated with the plastic money. So yeah,
Charmaine, I'm with you on that, babe. I'm so with you on that. Got to get off our butts and do it. And you know what I love about you girls in this channel? I think it's amazing that we can all figure this out together. And I love that. Karen, please email me about that stuff. I would love to hear more about that. And we're going to be then doing a deep dive on Australia, Aussie Oz, in the next couple of weeks, as well as we want to do Spartacus. I mean, I definitely think we need more traditional men in this world. We need more Spartacuses.
I know. I actually posted something on my YouTube comment community tab, and I was like, "This is an unpopular opinion," because it was a video of this woman saying, "Bring back the patriarchy." Because she's like, "I want to be taken care of. I want to be a housewife." And I was like, "I'm so grateful that my boyfriend does have that. Even though I work my butt off, but my boyfriend takes care of the house."
But there's a difference between men who are dominating women because they themselves haven't understood their power. And there's a difference between, you know, being in a relationship or a marriage with a man, whereas a woman when the time is right, you can just switch off everything and become completely feminine and allow the man to take over. But, you know, there's also times where women lead. Women are much better leaders than men. Because if you look at men, like in the military, for example, I mean, you know, they love taking orders. So, you know, and that's why it's also important for women not to control that, because there are lots of men who are dominant, and women are horrendous in their in their negative polarity.
Listen,
so we have to find that balance, you know. We have to find that balance.
I don't even know when our bills are due. He takes care, and I love it. I get to be, even though I get to work and do my shows and do my research and I get to teach, he takes over that role. Now I do dominantly am the one that does the housework. I'm the one that does the laundry and does the cleaning, but I don't mind doing that.
It's our natural, it's in our DNA to do that. So why would we not want that for ourselves?
I don't mind cleaning the toilet. You're taking care of me. You're making sure I'm taken care of. You're making sure there's a roof over my head, that there's food in the refrigerator. I don't mind being the one to clean the toilet and to fold your tidy whities. Like, I don't mind. Like, that's totally fine with me.
Not tidy whities. Anything not tidy whities. Okay.
If you wore tidy whities, I'd laugh at him.
Karen, I don't like your Australian men that wear their pants right up to under their armpits when they're playing that funny kind of rugby. Seriously, they just wear nicer outfits. That's all. I agree with you. I mean, I've got lots of sibs in Australia, and my brothers-in-law are Australian, and you know.
My boyfriend, I will say, my boyfriend wears briefs. He does wear briefs. And if he had tidy whities on, because he's covered in, Shanti knows him, he's covered in tattoos. Like, he's covered in, like, just tattoos. If he got naked and had tidy whities on with those tattoos on, I think I would have to take a picture and post it. Because I'd probably be laughing so hard.
No tidy whities. He's something more sexy than that, please. No, gosh. And Y fronts, the tidy whitey Y fronts. No, we don't want that.
He wears black boxer briefs. He's very sexy. I think he's very sexy. So, you know.
I agree, silver linings. We will continue to piss them off. And, you know, Bryce and I were actually just talking before the show. Rest assured, and we could really do with your prayers and your good wishes, because right now we're under a lot of psychic attack. They send us these crazy creatures of the night in our dreams and stuff like that. And as you can see, we're still going strong. But this is a very...
Well, but this is hysterical, you guys. Shanti and I had the same person in our dream, and it's not a person we know. It's like a demonic. And we were both like, no shit, you too.
Yeah. I had him maybe, when did I have him? Like 3 or 4 nights ago.
I had him last night. So, yeah. LOL, controllers, LOL. Karen, you didn't derail our conversation, hon. We're all here together. Just because Shanti and I have our faces on camera doesn't mean y'all aren't just as much a part of this conversation. So I enjoy, listen, I'm going to be giggling. Karen, I'm going to be giggling about your badass great grandma all day.
Please email me, Karen. I'd love to know about that, and we can do some research on that. And yeah, we'd definitely be talking about these things. You know, sort of talking about the stuff that, you know, there's so many different layers to life. And the more we just, and some people might not think stuff like this is relevant to the Cabal at all. Of course it is. Mm-hmm. We going deep, you know, and we just start scratching around there, and we're just bringing in, creating little cracks, you know, where the light comes in. And what was that song by Leonard Cohen? Hang on, what's the lyrics of that song by Leonard Cohen? Something about the light coming in. I can't remember. I'll find it. Sure, I've just hit a blank now. But Leonard Cohen had one of those songs, and Rumi has also got a beautiful quote saying, "The wound is where the light enters you." So wherever the wound is where the light comes in. So let us never forget that.
It takes the power away. Like, we've been taught to venerate these assholes, and if we can actually laugh at her BJ chair instead of venerate her, then there's no more power anymore. They've lost that power. They've lost that control, right?
Exactly. So, and see, you know, the truth sets us free. That's what one of Jesus' very famous quotes, if you will. The truth shall set you free. So the minute we start discovering the truth about these things and talking about them and actually having a sense of humor about them,
Yeah.
and not getting all
demons
uptight and getting our knickers in a knot and your tidy whities all.
Yeah, demons can't laugh, you guys. Demons don't know. That's the greatest power because it's a high vibration, right? To like chuckle at the asking to see the coffee table again. Like that's hysterical. The fact that you can chuckle about that and this, it takes the power away from this group. And my suspicion, Shanti, and this is just me and my tinfoil hat, I have no proof about this. I think, though, I believe Catherine the Great became Victoria, who's my 5 times great grandmother, who then became Queen Elizabeth II. That's just my weirdo.
It wouldn't. I mean, it's not a bad idea, and not idea is not the word, but it would seem very possible and very plausible because we know that these entities keep themselves. They keep reincarnating, and they'll keep reincarnating into these roles of power, and they keep doing the same thing in a different way. Yeah.
I love
that. Absolutely.
I'm a rebel at heart. I just want to piss them off. I'm good at pissing people off. And actually, we should plug it, Shanti. Tomorrow, I think it's at 10 o'clock Eastern time, my time, you guys. Shanti and I actually filmed a video on Friday together on my channel called Christians Behaving Badly. And that's going to premiere tomorrow at 10 a.m. So if you guys, at Eastern time, so wherever you are in the world. So, tune
into that.
Yeah, I love, Karen did say she stole a loaf of bread, wore a dress she couldn't afford to court, and got put on a boat to Australia.
Well, I mean, that's just like crazy. She wore a dress. How dare she? And especially when she couldn't afford to go, and she couldn't afford to go to court.
Karen,
put on a boat to Australia.
Very proud of your grandmama. I mean, very proud that's where you come from, because that takes some balls, right? It takes balls to do just like the table.
Absolutely.
It takes guts. And so our ancestors collectively had guts. They had to have guts to face what they faced collectively. So yeah.
Well, they birthed us, so yeah, we are.
Yeah, we are. Here we are.
Yeah, we are. We are the ancestors in the modern day world.
Yeah. So.
And when we all meet sometime, it's either I'm still thinking of having a big fat Africa party, like where we used to have Africa Burn. I'm just gonna have Africa party, Arrow party somewhere, and we'll all get together and we all just boogie our asses off.
I'm planning on doing a retreat here, but I'm gonna wait, you guys. I was gonna try to do it in the late summertime, but this is a year where we have I don't know if we can say the E word. We have a competition happening in America this year, just like 2020. We know what happened in 2020, so I'm looking at doing it after the competition because I don't want anybody getting hurt or getting.
I would say rather do it after.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about. I didn't realize when I planned it that this was going to be the year of the big competition. So I'm going to wait until I think after the fall to schedule it so that everybody that wants to come, especially if you're coming in from overseas, you're not going to get stuck where you can't get to the airport. We have no, I mean, that was a crazy summer, you guys. That summer of love was fucking crazy. So, we're just to play it safe, not to play it stupid. So anyway, but yeah, it'd be so cool to like hang out with everybody in person. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yay, everybody. God bless you all. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. Always fun to have you in the chats with us. Karen, please send me that info. We're going to be doing, I think maybe, do we have one more show on this one, Bryce?
Oh, no. We've got Paul, Alexander, and then we're going to come into the bolt. So we got like at least three more
shows. Yeah. And then, so we'll be busy for a little while on this. But catch us on Wednesday again on Solutions with Shanti. And then we will be doing something else. I'm not quite sure what yet, but I'll let you know.
We'll find something, guys. We'll find something.
We will. We sure will. Okay, everybody. God bless you. Take good care. We shall see you soon. And I wish you health, wealth, and all the abundance you could possibly manage. Take good care. Cherry byes.